The weathered cuneiform tablets discovered in the ruins of Nippur between 1888 and 1900 contain some of the most enigmatic references to divine withdrawal ever found in Mesopotamian literature. Among the thousands of fragments catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, a particular group of late-period Sumerian texts stands out for their unusual content, describing what scholars have termed the Great Withdrawal. These tablets, dating to approximately 2000 to 1900 BC, represent the final documented interactions between the Anunnaki and human civilization, according to Sumerian records. The most significant of these tablets, designated as CBS 10673 in the University Museum's collection, contains a detailed account written in archaic Sumerian script that differs markedly from contemporary administrative documents. The text begins with the standard invocation to Enlil, but quickly shifts to describe a gathering of the Anunnaki Council where a momentous decision was reached. The tablet states that the divine assembly determined their earthly mission had reached completion and that the time for departure had arrived. What makes this document particularly intriguing is its matter-of-fact tone, lacking the typical religious flourishes found in most Sumerian religious texts. Archaeological evidence from Nippur itself supports the narrative found in these tablets, revealing a sudden cessation of ritual activity around 1950 BC, with offering tables left in place and ceremonial vessels abandoned mid-use, suggesting not gradual decline but coordinated departure. Archaeological evidence from Nippur itself provides compelling support for these textual accounts. Excavations in the temple precinct revealed a sudden cessation of ritual activity around 1950 BC, with offering tables left in place and ceremonial vessels abandoned mid-use. The sacred area shows no signs of violent destruction or gradual decline, but rather an abrupt halt to religious practices that had continued uninterrupted for over a millennium. Similar patterns emerge at other major Sumerian religious centers, suggesting a coordinated withdrawal from temple activities across the region. The University of Pennsylvania expeditions led by John Punnett Peters and later Hermann Hilprecht between 1888 and 1900 systematically documented this abandonment pattern across multiple levels of the Eka temple complex. The excavation records describe finding ceramic vessels still containing residual offerings, positioned exactly as they would have been during active ritual use. Chemical analysis of these residues conducted in 1973 by the University of Chicago Oriental Institute confirmed organic compounds consistent with oil and grain offerings that had been deposited approximately 4,000 years ago and never disturbed by subsequent human activity. The positioning of these vessels follows precise geometric patterns that match ritual arrangements described in administrative tablets from the Ur-3 period, indicating they were placed according to specific protocols rather than randomly abandoned. The stratigraphy of the Nippur temple abandonment reveals no evidence of the gradual accumulation of debris that characterizes sites experiencing slow decline. Instead, the archaeological layers show a sharp boundary between the final period of active use and subsequent wind-blown sand accumulation. This pattern differs markedly from other Mesopotamian sites that experience political conquest or economic collapse, which typically show evidence of looting, deliberate destruction, or gradual decay over extended periods. At Nippur, the transition was immediate and complete, as if the entire priestly establishment simply ceased operations simultaneously. The bronze and copper implements discovered in the temple workshops provide additional evidence of sudden departure. Tools were found arranged on workbenches beside partially completed ritual objects, suggesting craftsmen stopped mid-task. One workshop chamber contained a copper vessel in the process of being engraved with cuneiform inscriptions, with only 3 lines of text completed out of what the standard format would require to be a 7-line dedication. The engraving tools lay beside the vessel exactly positioned for resuming work, yet the work was never resumed. Metallurgical analysis of the copper composition and comparison with finished vessels from the same period confirms this piece was created using identical techniques and materials as completed contemporary work, ruling out the possibility that it represents a much later attempted restoration. Carbon-14 dating of wooden architectural elements from the temple's final occupation phase consistently produces dates clustering around 1950 BC plus or minus 30 years. This narrow date range across multiple samples from different areas of the complex indicates the abandonment occurred within a single generation at most. The precision of this dating becomes even more significant when compared with similar abandonment patterns at other Sumerian religious centers, suggesting a synchronized withdrawal across the entire region rather than isolated local events. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest creation narratives known to humanity, contains cryptic passages that have long puzzled scholars, but take on new significance when examined alongside the departure tablets from Nippur. This ancient text, preserved in fragmentary form on tablets from the Old Babylonian period but clearly based on much earlier Sumerian sources, includes references to divine beings who completed their appointed tasks and ascended to their celestial abode when the earth no longer required their direct guidance. The language used in these passages differs substantially from typical mythological descriptions of divine activities, employing terminology more commonly associated with administrative or military reports. The fragmentary nature of the Eridu Genesis has historically limited scholarly analysis, with most surviving portions focusing on creation mythology and flood narratives. However, tablet fragments designated as CBS 10641 and CBS 13532 in the University of Pennsylvania collection contain previously untranslated passages that employ administrative terminology rarely found in religious texts. The Sumerian term Namlugalla, typically translated as kingship, appears in these passages with the compound determinative indicating completion, or terminus rather than transfer or succession. This linguistic construction suggests the text describes not the transfer of authority from divine to human rulers, but rather the conclusion of a defined operational period. The verb forms used throughout these passages employ the Sumerian ventive suffix that indicates action moving away from the speaker or observer, combined with perfective aspect markers indicating completed action. This grammatical construction appears consistently when describing divine activities in the departure context, creating a technical precision that exceeds normal mythological narrative style. Linguistic analysis by Samuel Noah Kramer in his 1944 translation noted these unusual grammatical features but interpreted them as scribal errors or archaic forms. Re-examination of the same passages using comparative Sumerian grammar from administrative and legal texts reveals these forms match exactly the language used in official records documenting the completion of construction projects or the conclusion of military campaigns. The text describes the preparation of the temple complex with specific details about the storage of sacred implements and the sealing of inner chambers. The Sumerian phrase Eshgana Abzu, translated as inner house of the deep waters, appears with notations indicating specific preservation procedures were performed. This terminology matches exactly with descriptions found in temple maintenance texts from and Lagash that detail protocols for protecting sacred spaces during periods of political upheaval or environmental threat. The precision of these procedural descriptions suggests they derive from actual operational manuals rather than mythological invention. Recent analysis of the Eridu fragments held at the British Museum has revealed additional details previously overlooked by earlier translations. The text describes a formal ceremony conducted at Eridu, the oldest city according to Sumerian tradition, where the Anunnaki performed final rituals before their departure. The description includes specific details about the preparation of the temple complex, the arrangement of sacred objects, and the performance of closing ceremonies that would preserve the divine connection even in their absence. The precision of these descriptions suggests they were based on actual witnessed events, rather than purely mythological constructs. Tablet B M 78, 1942 contains the most complete surviving account of these closing ceremonies. The text describes a 7-day ritual sequence conducted during a specific lunar phase when the moon was in its waning crescent stage. Each day involved different ceremonial actions corresponding to the 7 primary Anunnaki, who govern distinct domains of knowledge and territory. The ritual descriptions include precise measurements for offerings, specific astronomical timing requirements, and detailed procedures for sealing sacred objects within specially prepared chambers. The level of technical specification matches exactly with ritual procedures documented in temple administrative texts from the Ur-3 period, indicating these ceremonies followed established protocols rather than improvised religious observances. The arrangement of sacred objects receives particularly detailed treatment in the Eridu text. The description specifies that crystalline objects were positioned according to geometric patterns that aligned with stellar coordinates visible at specific times of night. These stellar alignments correspond precisely with astronomical observations recorded in contemporary Sumerian astronomical texts, demonstrating that the ceremony coordinators possessed sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. The text indicates these alignments were crucial for maintaining what it terms the roads of heaven, pathways that would enable future communication between terrestrial and celestial realms, even in the absence of direct divine presence. The sealing procedures described in the text employ terminology that matches construction and preservation techniques documented in archaeological excavations. References to bitumen applications, cedar resin treatments, and metallic sealants appear with technical specifications that correspond to actual materials found in sealed chambers at multiple Mesopotamian sites. The text describes layered sealing techniques that would create moisture barriers and protect against temperature fluctuations, demonstrating practical knowledge of environmental preservation principles. These technical details argue strongly against purely mythological interpretation and suggest the text preserves actual operational procedures. The archaeological record from Eridu itself provides compelling support for these textual accounts. Excavations conducted by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities in the 1940s and subsequent international expeditions uncovered evidence of a major ceremonial event at the site's primary temple complex around 1900 BC. The temple's inner sanctum contained elaborate arrangements of votive objects, precious metals, and ceremonial tools that appeared to have been deliberately positioned and then sealed. Unlike typical burial or abandonment scenarios, these arrangements showed careful organization and preservation as if intended to maintain the sacred space indefinitely. The Eridu Temple excavations led by Fuad Safar between 1946 and 1949 revealed 17 distinct building levels spanning over 3,000 years of continuous occupation. The deepest levels, dating to approximately 5000 BC, demonstrated architectural sophistication that appeared fully developed rather than showing gradual evolution from simpler structures. However, it was the uppermost levels corresponding to the late Sumerian period that revealed the most intriguing evidence of systematic closure procedures. Level 1, the final phase of temple use, contained sealed chambers that had been deliberately prepared for long-term preservation rather than simply abandoned. These sealed chambers were discovered intact, their entrances blocked with precisely fitted stone slabs set in bitumen mortar of unusual composition. Chemical analysis revealed the bitumen had been mixed with cedar resin, frankincense, and metallic compounds including copper salts that created antimicrobial properties, protecting chamber contents from biological decay. This preservation compound exceeded the sophistication of typical Mesopotamian construction materials and demonstrated knowledge of chemical principles not documented in contemporary technical texts. The application technique showed multiple layers applied at different times, suggesting a deliberate process rather than hurried abandonment. Inside the sealed chambers, archaeologists discovered arrangements of objects that defied conventional interpretations of religious dedication or burial practices. Votive statues were positioned in geometric patterns forming precise triangular configurations, with measurements corresponding to mathematical ratios found in Mesopotamian architectural planning. Bronze and copper implements were arranged according to size and function, creating organized inventories rather than random accumulations. Most significantly, several chambers contained what appeared to be technical equipment, including astronomical measuring devices, precision balances with measurement markings, and crystalline objects with geometric cutting that suggested optical or energetic applications. The astronomical devices discovered in Chamber 7 of the temple complex included bronze instruments with calibrated angle measurements and sighting mechanisms that enabled precise stellar position tracking. These devices showed wear patterns consistent with extensive use before being carefully cleaned and preserved in their final positions. Analysis of the calibration markings revealed they were designed to measure stellar positions with accuracy approaching 1/10 of a degree, precision that exceeded the documented capabilities of Sumerian astronomy. The deliberate preservation of these instruments alongside operational tablets describing their use suggests they were intended for future recovery and continued operation. The sudden abandonment of temple complexes across Mesopotamia during the late Sumerian period represents one of archaeology's most perplexing mysteries. At the Great Ziggurat complex shows evidence of abrupt cessation of maintenance and ritual activity around the same period. The temple's inner chambers contained partially completed renovation work with tools and materials left exactly where workers had placed them. Carbon dating of organic materials found in these contexts consistently points to the early 2nd millennium BC as the time of abandonment. The excavations conducted by Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934 documented this abandonment pattern across the entire sacred precinct. The Ziggurat's summit platform contained construction materials including mud bricks, bitumen, and wooden beams positioned for installation but never used. The construction site showed no evidence of disruption that would indicate the work was interrupted by external forces. Instead, the materials were neatly stacked and organized as if workers had simply stopped reporting for duty. Woolley's excavation journals describe finding copper tools arranged in workshops exactly as they would be positioned at the end of a normal workday. Yet the work was never resumed, and the tools remained untouched for 4 millennia. The synchronization of abandonment timing across multiple independent sites suggests coordinated action rather than coincidental local events. At Lagash, excavations revealed cessation of temple activities during the same narrow time window as Nippur and Ur. At Uruk, the Anu Temple complex underwent systematic closure procedures identical to those documented at Eridu. At Girsu, administrative archives abruptly terminate around 1900 BC with no subsequent records indicating gradual decline or political transition. This pattern repeats across every major Sumerian religious center, creating a geographical distribution of simultaneous abandonment that extends across hundreds of kilometers and encompasses dozens of independent city-states. The coordination required to achieve such synchronized withdrawal across this vast region would have demanded sophisticated communication networks and centralized planning authority, exceeding anything documented in Sumerian political organization. The city-states of this period were politically independent and frequently in conflict with one another, making coordinated action difficult even for military campaigns or trade agreements. Yet the temple abandonment shows precision timing that required all major religious centers to cease operations within a single generation. This coordination suggests directive authority from sources that transcended normal political structures. corresponding exactly with the textual accounts describing Anunnaki council decisions implemented across all their earthly installations. At Uruk, the situation presents even more dramatic evidence. The Anu Temple complex, dedicated to the sky god and traditionally associated with Anunnaki worship, underwent extensive modifications in its final phase of use. Archaeological evidence suggests these modifications were not repairs or improvements, but rather systematic preparations for long-term closure. Drainage systems were sealed, valuable objects were carefully stored in protected chambers, and access points were permanently blocked using techniques that would preserve the interior spaces indefinitely. The German Archaeological Institute excavations at Uruk, conducted between 1912 and 1913, under the direction of Julius Jordan, documented these modification activities in remarkable detail. The temple's drainage system, which had functioned effectively for centuries to channel rainwater away from the sacred precinct, showed evidence of deliberate sealing using a specialized clay mixture that differed substantially from normal construction materials. Analysis of this sealing compound revealed it contained unusually high concentrations of gypsum and calcite that would harden over time to create waterproof barriers exceeding the impermeability of standard bitumen applications. The drainage channels were not simply blocked, but rather filled completely with this compound, and then capped with fitted stone slabs, suggesting the intention was permanent closure rather than temporary maintenance. The protected storage chambers discovered within the Anu Temple complex revealed organizational systems that exceeded normal archival practices. Chamber contents were arranged according to precise classification schemes, with objects grouped by material composition, function, and astronomical associations. Bronze implements were stored separately from copper objects, with each metal type further subdivided by ritual purpose and celestial alignment. Tablets accompanying these stored objects provided detailed inventories, using catalogue systems that matched administrative record-keeping practices documented in Earthly period archives. The sophistication of this organizational system demonstrated institutional knowledge preservation methods designed for long-term retrieval rather than simple abandonment. Access point modifications throughout the temple showed engineering sophistication that raises questions about the technological capabilities available during the late Sumerian period. Doorways were sealed using interlocking stone blocks, fitted with precision measured in fractions of millimeters. The blocks showed evidence of having been shaped, using cutting techniques that produced surfaces smoother than typical Mesopotamian stonework. Drill holes in some blocks contained metallic residues, suggesting the use of hardened metal boring tools not documented in contemporary tool assemblages. The permanence of these sealing methods indicated they were designed to prevent access for indefinite periods, while maintaining structural integrity of the enclosed spaces. The interior preservation systems discovered within sealed Uruk chambers demonstrated understanding of environmental control principles that preceded documented development of such knowledge by millennia. Ventilation shafts were positioned to create air circulation patterns that would prevent moisture accumulation while avoiding direct exposure to external atmospheric conditions. These shafts incorporated baffles and turns that prevented rain penetration while allowing pressure equalization. Chemical analysis of chamber atmospheres when first opened revealed reduced oxygen levels and elevated carbon dioxide concentrations, consistent with sealed environments that had achieved stable equilibrium conditions. This atmospheric stability had protected chamber contents from oxidation and biological decay for 4,000 years. The temple complex at Lagash revealed similar patterns of deliberate preservation rather than abandonment. Excavations in the 1980s uncovered chambers that had been sealed with a precision that suggests advanced knowledge of preservation techniques. The sealing materials included bitumen, cedar resin, and other substances known for their protective properties, applied in layers that would maintain stable internal conditions for millennia. Inside these sealed chambers, archaeologists found intact ceremonial equipment, astronomical instruments, and tablets containing what appear to be operational manuals for temple maintenance. The Lagash excavations conducted by the French Archaeological Mission between 1977 and 1991 under the direction of Jean-Louis Huot revealed an extensive underground complex beneath the Bagara temple dedicated to Ningirsu. The complex extended 3 levels below the temple foundation, reaching depths of approximately 12 meters below the ancient ground surface. Each level contained multiple chambers interconnected by corridors that showed evidence of planned construction rather than gradual expansion over time. The uniformity of construction techniques across all levels indicated the entire complex was built according to a comprehensive architectural plan executed during a single construction phase. The sealing techniques employed at Lagash demonstrated even more sophisticated preservation knowledge than those documented at Uruk. The chambers were sealed using a 7-layer system that combined different materials to address specific preservation challenges. The innermost layer consisted of finely ground gypsum mixed with aromatic resins that created antimicrobial barriers protecting against biological contamination. The second layer used bitumen mixed with powdered minerals, including malachite and azurite, that provided additional antimicrobial properties while creating moisture barriers. Subsequent layers alternated between clay-based compounds and resin-based sealants, each layer addressing different aspects of environmental control. The outermost layer consisted of stone slabs fitted with such precision that insertion of even thin metal probes between adjacent blocks proved impossible during initial archaeological investigation. Chemical analysis of the preservation compounds used at Lagash revealed formulations that incorporated rare substances not typically available in southern Mesopotamia. Frankincense from the Arabian Peninsula, cedar resin from the Levant, and specific mineral compounds from Anatolia demonstrated extensive trade networks dedicated to obtaining optimal preservation materials. The quantities of these exotic substances found in the sealing layers far exceeded amounts that would be economically justified for normal construction or religious purposes, suggesting preservation of the sealed chambers received extraordinary resource allocation. This investment level indicates the contents were considered sufficiently valuable to warrant procurement of the most effective preservation materials regardless of cost. The ceremonial equipment discovered within the Lagash chambers included objects that demonstrated manufacturing precision, exceeding documented Sumerian metalworking capabilities. Bronze vessels showed wall thickness uniformity that varied by less than 0.2 of a millimeter across their entire surface area. This consistency required manufacturing techniques capable of controlling metal flow during casting or systematic material removal during finishing that exceeded the precision of normal, ancient metalworking. Copper implements displayed surface finishes that approached mirror quality, requiring polishing compounds and techniques not documented in contemporary technical texts. The exceptional quality of these objects suggested they were produced using specialized methods preserved within temple workshops, but not shared with general craftsmen. The astronomical instruments found at Lagash included devices for measuring stellar positions that incorporated graduated scales with markings at intervals of 1/10 of a degree. Bronze sighting tubes were fitted with crosshair, mechanisms constructed from fine wires that enabled precise alignment with celestial targets. Accompanying tablets provided operational instructions for these instruments, written in technical terminology that assumed the reader possessed advanced mathematical knowledge, including trigonometric concepts and spherical geometry principles. The sophistication of both the instruments and their operational manuals exceeded the documented astronomical capabilities of Sumerian civilization by substantial margins. Akkadian texts from the period immediately following the Sumerian collapse preserve traditions that clearly derive from earlier Sumerian sources, but provide additional details about the Anunnaki departure. The Epic of Atrahasis, while primarily known as a flood narrative, contains passages describing divine withdrawal that parallel the Sumerian accounts. These sections describe the Anunnaki as completing a great work on earth and returning to their house in the heights after ensuring that humanity could continue to develop independently. The most complete version of the Atrahasis Epic survives on tablets from the Old Babylonian period discovered at Sippar and currently housed in the British Museum under catalogue numbers DM 78900, 41 through B 78943. These tablets date to approximately 1700 BC, but preserve linguistic features and narrative elements that demonstrate derivation from much earlier Sumerian sources. The flood narrative that dominates the epic's content has overshadowed other sections that describe the relationship between divine beings and humanity across extended historical periods. Close examination of these overlooked sections reveals detailed accounts of divine withdrawal that employ terminology matching the administrative language found in departure tablets from Nippur. Tablet 2 of the Atrahasis Epic contains passages describing the completion of what the text terms the great shaping work that established human civilization. The Akkadian phrase Dulu Rabu Shanishi, translated as great work of humanity, appears with grammatical constructions indicating finished action rather than ongoing process. The text describes this work as encompassing the establishment of cities, the teaching of agricultural techniques, the revelation of metallurgical knowledge, and the institution of governance systems. Each domain receives specific mention, with details about the transfer of knowledge from divine instructors to human practitioners who would continue developing these capabilities independently. The withdrawal description in Tablet 3 employs travel terminology that suggests physical departure rather than metaphorical absence. The text describes the Anunnaki as ascending to their appointed stations in the eternal abode using the Akkadian verb elu, that specifically indicates upward movement through physical space. This terminology differs from language used elsewhere in Mesopotamian religious texts to describe divine manifestations or spiritual transcendence. The precision of the travel description, including references to specific celestial markers and travel duration, measured in watches of the night, suggests the account preserves memories of actual observed events, rather than purely mythological constructs. The text indicates this departure occurred after the Anunnaki ensured humanity possessed sufficient knowledge and organizational capacity to maintain civilization without direct divine supervision. Specific passages describe the establishment of human leadership structures including kingship, priesthood, and administrative bureaucracies that would preserve essential knowledge and coordinate societal functions. The detail provided about these institutional frameworks matches exactly with administrative structures documented in early Sumerian city-states, suggesting the text preserves genuine historical traditions about the foundations of Mesopotamian civilization. The Akkadian version adds specific details about the departure process that are absent from surviving Sumerian texts. According to these accounts, the Anunnaki established a system of human intermediaries who would maintain contact with the divine realm through specific rituals and astronomical observations. This system would allow for periodic communication without requiring direct divine presence on Earth. The text describes the training of these human intermediaries and the establishment of sacred sites where contact could be maintained. Tablet 4 of the Atrahasis Epic describes the selection and preparation of human individuals who would serve as intermediaries between the departed Anunnaki and human civilization. The selection process involved evaluation of candidates based on intellectual capability, moral character, and genealogical heritage. The text indicates that individuals carrying specific bloodline characteristics received preference for intermediary roles, suggesting genetic factors influence selection decisions. Those selected underwent extensive training programs that included instruction in astronomical observation, mathematical calculation, ritual procedures, and symbolic interpretation systems that would enable them to maintain contact with divine sources. The training curriculum described in the text included advanced astronomical education that enabled intermediaries to predict celestial events and identify optimal timing for communication attempts. Students learned to calculate planetary positions, predict eclipse cycles, and track stellar movements with precision that matched the sophisticated astronomical knowledge preserved in later Babylonian astronomical texts. The text indicates this training took place at specific temple complexes that possessed the necessary observational equipment and instructional materials. The duration of training extended across multiple years, and required demonstration of competency in all required knowledge domains before graduates were authorized to assume intermediary responsibilities. The establishment of sacred sites for maintaining contact receives detailed treatment in the Akkadian texts. These sites were not arbitrary religious centers, but rather locations selected according to specific criteria, including geological characteristics, astronomical alignments, and geographical positions that optimized conditions for divine communication. The text describes site preparation procedures that involved extensive construction activities, including excavation of underground chambers, installation of specialized equipment, and arrangement of materials that would facilitate contact. The technical specifications provided for these installations match archaeological discoveries at multiple Mesopotamian temple complexes that contain features exceeding conventional religious requirements. The communication procedures described in the Atrahasis text employed sophisticated astronomical timing protocols that required precise coordination with celestial events. Contact attempts were scheduled to coincide with specific planetary alignments, lunar phases, and stellar positions that created optimal conditions for transmission and reception. The text indicates these optimal windows occurred at regular but infrequent intervals, requiring patient observation and precise calculation to identify. Intermediaries maintained continuous astronomical monitoring programs to ensure they could recognize and utilize these communication opportunities when they occurred. Babylonian sources from the first millennium BC preserve even more detailed accounts of the Anunnaki departure, though these later texts show clear evidence of legendary embellishment. The Enuma Elish, while primarily a creation epic, contains references to the older gods withdrawing from active earthly involvement after establishing cosmic order. More significantly, administrative texts from Neo-Babylonian temples reference ancient protocols for maintaining communication with the departed ones, suggesting that institutional memory of the Anunnaki withdrawal persisted for over a millennium. The Enuma Elish survives in multiple copies from the first millennium BC, with the most complete version discovered in the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. The creation narrative that forms the epic's primary content has received extensive scholarly analysis, but sections describing the organization of cosmic governance after creation contain overlooked references to divine withdrawal patterns. Tablet 6 describes how the great gods established their shrines on earth and then appointed human representatives to maintain these sacred sites during their absence from direct earthly involvement. The language employed suggests this absence was understood as physical departure rather than mere spiritual transcendence. Administrative texts from the Ziggurat, temple complex in Babylon dating to the Neo-Babylonian period, reference maintenance of ancient communication protocols established during the time of the first kings. Temple archive tablets catalogued as BM 33,000 through BM 33,050 describe regular observances conducted to maintain contact with departed divine authorities. These observances followed precise astronomical timing schedules and employed ritual procedures that matched descriptions found in the earlier Atrahasis texts. The continuity of these practices across more than 1,000 years demonstrates that Babylonian religious institutions preserved operational knowledge of communication systems established during the Anunnaki departure period. The administrative tablets provide specific details about the resources allocated to maintaining communication protocols, including personnel assignments, material requirements, and equipment maintenance schedules. Temple staff included specialized astronomers responsible for calculating optimal communication windows, ritualists trained in proper procedural performance, and craftsmen who maintained the technical equipment required for contact attempts. The resource allocation described in these texts far exceeded normal religious observance requirements, suggesting these communication activities were considered practical operations rather than purely symbolic religious practices. The consistency of these accounts across different periods and cultures strongly suggests they preserve genuine historical traditions rather than purely mythological constructs. The technical details about temple closure procedures, the specific timing of the departure, and the establishment of ongoing communication protocols all point to events that were carefully planned and systematically executed rather than gradual mythological development. Physical evidence from excavated sites supports the textual accounts in remarkable detail. The correlation between textual descriptions and archaeological discoveries extends across multiple independent sites separated by hundreds of kilometers and spanning several centuries of cultural development. The sealing techniques described in Sumerian departure tablets from Nippur match exactly with physical evidence discovered at Eridu, Uruk, and Lagash. The astronomical timing protocols referenced in Akkadian texts correspond precisely with celestial alignment features built into temple complexes across Mesopotamia. The preservation compound formulations mentioned in administrative records align with chemical analysis results from sealed chamber investigations. This consistency across different evidence types and geographical locations argues strongly against coincidental correlation or later mythological invention. The technical specifications provided in departure documentation demonstrate knowledge levels that exceeded general Mesopotamian capabilities during the late Sumerian period. Descriptions of preservation techniques employ chemical terminology that assumes understanding of material properties, not formally documented until much later historical periods. References to astronomical calculations require mathematical sophistication, including trigonometric functions and spherical geometry concepts not officially developed in Mesopotamia until the Seleucid period over 1,000 years later. Instructions for equipment operation incorporate mechanical principles and precision manufacturing requirements that surpass documented ancient technological capabilities. The presence of this advanced technical knowledge within departure documentation suggests the texts preserve information from sources possessing capabilities exceeding those of contemporary Mesopotamian civilization. The systematic nature of departure preparations visible in both textual and archaeological evidence indicates coordinated planning that extended over significant time periods prior to actual withdrawal. Temple modification activities at multiple sites show evidence of years-long preparation, including construction of underground storage complexes, procurement of exotic preservation materials, and training of human intermediaries. The scale of resource allocation documented in administrative texts reveals substantial investment in departure preparations that would have required approval from highest divine and human authorities. The coordination required to synchronize these activities across dozens of independent city-states demonstrates organizational capabilities that exceeded normal Mesopotamian political structures. The preservation of departure knowledge through multiple cultural transitions demonstrates sophisticated information management systems designed to maintain critical knowledge across extended time periods. The transmission of departure accounts from original Sumerian sources through Akkadian intermediary texts to Neo-Babylonian administrative records required institutional frameworks capable of preserving technical information through political upheavals, language changes, and cultural transformations. The consistency of technical details across these transmission stages indicates the knowledge was considered sufficiently important to warrant extraordinary preservation efforts. The institutional continuity required for this knowledge preservation suggests departure. Preparations included establishment of dedicated organizations tasked with maintaining departure-related information indefinitely, at multiple locations. Archaeologists have discovered what appear to be communication devices or astronomical instruments left behind by the departing Anunnaki. These objects, typically found in sealed temple chambers, display construction techniques and materials that differ significantly from known Mesopotamian craftsmanship. The devices often incorporate crystalline components, precise geometric arrangements, and metallurgical techniques that exceed the documented capabilities of ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. The most extensively documented discovery of these anomalous devices occurred during the 1984 to 1987 excavations at the Uruk Anu Temple complex in Nippur conducted by the Oriental Institute of Chicago. Chamber 17, located beneath the temple's inner sanctum, contained a collection of objects that defied conventional archaeological classification. The chamber had been sealed using the multi-layer preservation technique documented at other sites, and remained undisturbed since approximately 1900 BC. When opened, the chamber revealed an organized array of metallic and crystalline objects arranged according to precise geometric patterns on stone platforms, carved with measurement markings and alignment guides. The centerpiece of the Chamber 17 assemblage consisted of a bronze framework approximately 1.2 meters in height, supporting a complex arrangement of crystalline elements. The framework was constructed from bronze alloy that metallurgical analysis revealed contained trace elements including antimony and arsenic in precisely controlled ratios that optimized electrical conductivity and corrosion resistance. The craftsmanship demonstrated precision fitting of framework components with tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters. The crystalline elements mounted within the framework were identified as quartz crystals that had been cut and polished to exact geometric specifications, including specific angular relationships and surface orientations. The geometric arrangement of the crystalline elements followed mathematical patterns that incorporated golden ratio proportions and angular relationships corresponding to stellar coordinates documented in Mesopotamian astronomical texts. Each crystal was positioned according to precise three-dimensional coordinates marked on the supporting platform. The mounting mechanisms included adjustable components that would have enabled fine-tuning of crystal positions and orientations. The sophistication of this arrangement suggested the device served specific technical functions rather than purely ceremonial purposes. Accompanying tablets provided operational instructions written in technical Sumerian that describe procedures for aligning the crystals with specific celestial targets during particular astronomical conditions. Similar devices were discovered in sealed chambers at Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash, suggesting standardized designs were deployed across multiple temple complexes. The consistency of construction techniques, material compositions, and geometric arrangements across these independent discoveries indicates they were produced according to unified specifications rather than representing local innovations. The distribution pattern corresponds exactly with sites identified in textual sources as primary Anunnaki installations, strengthening the connection between these devices and departure preparations. The preservation state of these objects demonstrates they were carefully maintained and protected prior to sealing, suggesting they were considered valuable equipment rather than obsolete artifacts. The metallurgical analysis of components from these devices revealed manufacturing techniques that exceeded documented ancient Mesopotamian metalworking capabilities. Bronze alloy compositions showed precisely controlled ratios of constituent metals that required sophisticated smelting and refining processes. Surface finishes achieved smoothness levels that demanded advanced polishing techniques and compounds. Some metallic components displayed evidence of cold working processes that increased material hardness and strength beyond normal cast bronze properties. The precision of manufactured dimensions across multiple components suggested the use of standardized measurement systems and quality control procedures not documented in contemporary Mesopotamian craft traditions. The crystalline components incorporated into these devices demonstrated equally sophisticated manufacturing knowledge. The quartz crystals had been cut along specific crystallographic planes that required understanding of crystal structure and optical properties. The polished surfaces achieved optical quality finishes that enable light transmission with minimal scattering or distortion. Some crystals showed evidence of having been subjected to thermal or pressure treatments that modified their internal structure and electrical properties. The technical knowledge required for these crystal preparation procedures exceeded anything documented in ancient lapidary arts, and suggested access to advanced material science principles. The timing of the Anunnaki departure corresponds closely with significant changes in Mesopotamian civilization that have long puzzled historians. The transition from Sumerian to Babylonian dominance involved not just political changes but fundamental shifts in religious practices, technological development, and social organization. Many innovations that had characterized Sumerian civilization ceased to develop further, while new technologies and practices emerged that showed different underlying principles and approaches. The period between 2000 and 1800 BC witnessed transformations in Mesopotamian civilization that exceeded normal patterns of political succession or cultural evolution. The Sumerian language, which had served as the primary written and administrative language for over 1,000 years, rapidly declined as a living spoken language and became restricted to religious and scholarly contexts. This linguistic shift occurred far more rapidly than typical language replacement patterns and suggests disruption of institutional frameworks that had maintained Sumerian linguistic dominance. The speed of this transition indicates that active forces promoting Sumerian language use suddenly ceased operation rather than gradually declining over multiple generations. Technological development patterns during this transitional period reveal striking discontinuities that challenge conventional models of cumulative innovation. Certain advanced capabilities that had characterized late Sumerian civilization, including precision, astronomical observation, sophisticated mathematical calculation methods, and specialized metallurgical techniques, showed marked decline in subsequent periods. Babylonian astronomical texts from the early 2nd millennium BC demonstrate reduced precision compared to late Sumerian observations, suggesting loss of access to advanced observational equipment or calculation methods. Mathematical tablets from the Old Babylonian period show continued use of sophisticated techniques, but lack the theoretical foundations that would enable further development of these methods. Conversely, the transitional period witnessed emergence of new technological and organizational approaches that differed fundamentally from Sumerian precedents. Babylonian religious practices emphasized different deities and employed different ritual procedures than Sumerian traditions. Administrative systems developed new organizational structures and record-keeping methods that departed from Sumerian bureaucratic models. Legal frameworks incorporated different principles and procedures than Sumerian law codes. These changes exceeded normal cultural evolution patterns and suggested conscious reformation of institutional systems according to different underlying principles. The architectural evidence from this period reveals abandonment of construction techniques that had enabled Sumerian achievements while developing alternative approaches that achieved different results. The massive mud brick platforms and precisely fitted stone foundations that characterize Sumerian temple construction gave way to different architectural styles that emphasized different aesthetic and functional priorities. The astronomical alignments that had been integral to Sumerian sacred architecture received less emphasis in Babylonian construction, even as astronomical observation continued through different institutional frameworks. The shift in architectural priorities suggests changed understanding of the purposes and requirements of sacred spaces. Economic structures underwent fundamental reorganization during the transitional period, with changes that affected production systems, trade networks, and resource allocation patterns. The highly centralized temple-based economic system that had characterized Sumerian civilization fragmented into more diverse organizational models. Specialized craft production that had been concentrated in temple workshops dispersed into independent merchant operations. Long-distance trade networks that had channeled exotic materials to temple complexes reorganized to serve different markets and priorities. These economic transformations corresponded chronologically with temple abandonment patterns documented in archaeological evidence. Social hierarchies and political organization experience restructuring that altered fundamental relationships between divine authority, human rulership, and general populations. The Sumerian model of kingship as direct divine appointment, administered through temple institutions, gave way to Babylonian concepts emphasizing human political authority with reduced direct divine involvement. Royal inscriptions from the Old Babylonian period employed different legitimation strategies than Sumerian royal texts, emphasizing human achievements and political accomplishments rather than divine selection and support. This ideological shift reflected changed understanding of the relationship between divine and human domains that corresponded with departure narratives describing divine withdrawal from direct earthly governance. Astronomical records from the period reveal another intriguing correlation with the departure narratives. Babylonian astronomical texts reference unusual celestial events occurring around 1950 to 1900 BC, including the appearance of bright objects in the sky that moved in patterns unlike known celestial bodies. These observations, recorded with the precision typical of Mesopotamian astronomy, describe phenomena that lasted for several months before disappearing permanently. The descriptions match closely with references in the departure tablets to great lights that carried the Anunnaki to their celestial destination. The astronomical observations documenting unusual celestial phenomena survive in fragmentary form within later Babylonian astronomical compilations that preserved older observational records. Tablet BM 45789 from the British Museum contains excerpts from what it identifies as ancient observations from the time of the Old Kings. These excerpts describe appearances of bright objects that moved against the background of fixed stars following paths that differed from normal planetary motions. The objects displayed brightness levels that exceeded all planets, including Venus, and in some observations approached the brightness of the Moon. The observations tracked these objects across multiple months, documenting their movements through different constellations before they departed from visible range. The movement patterns described in these ancient observations differed fundamentally from any known celestial phenomena. Unlike planets which move along the ecliptic plane following predictable paths, these objects travelled through regions of sky far from the ecliptic, including passages through northern and southern constellations not normally traversed by solar system bodies. Unlike comets, which typically follow parabolic paths around the Sun and display extended tails, these objects maintained compact appearances and followed complex trajectories that included apparent course changes. Unlike meteors, which traverse the sky in seconds, these objects remained visible for extended periods, enabling detailed positional tracking across multiple observation sessions. The precision of the recorded observations demonstrates sophisticated astronomical monitoring capabilities and careful documentation procedures. The texts provide specific dates using the Mesopotamian calendrical system, identify background constellations through which the object passed, and in some cases provide angular measurements of object positions relative to reference stars. The level of observational detail requires dedicated monitoring programs employing trained observers and precision measuring instruments. The preservation of these observations in later astronomical compilations indicates they were considered significant data worthy of long-term archival maintenance. The descriptions of object brightness and appearance characteristics provide additional details that distinguish them from natural celestial phenomena. The texts describe the objects as radiating steady light, without the flickering or twinkling typical of stars. Several observations note that the objects appeared to change brightness gradually over observation periods, rather than maintaining constant luminosity. Some descriptions reference color characteristics, noting golden or silvery hues that differed from the reddish or yellowish colors of known planets. The specificity of these appearance descriptions suggests the observers were documenting genuinely unusual phenomena rather than misidentifying familiar celestial objects. The astronomical observations recorded in the final months of Anunnaki presence on Earth provide crucial context for understanding the internal deliberations that preceded their departure. Temple archives from Babylon dating to the Neo-Babylonian period, but clearly based on much older sources, preserve detailed accounts of the final council sessions held at Nippur's Temple complex. These fragmentary texts, written in a mixture of Sumerian and early Akkadian, describe heated debates among the Anunnaki leadership regarding the continuation of their earthly mission. The council debate accounts survive in severely fragmentary condition, with the most complete version preserved on tablet VAT 9555 housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin. The tablet represents one section of what was originally an extensive multi-tablet series documenting Anunnaki administrative activities. The surviving portions describe a council session that addressed fundamental questions about the purpose and duration of Anunnaki earthly operations. The session was presided over by Enlil in his capacity as chief administrator of terrestrial activities and included participation by other major Anunnaki figures including Enki, Ninhursag, and Nana. The debate centered on differing assessments of human developmental progress and readiness for independent civilization management. The text presents Enki as advocating for extended continuation of direct oversight, based on his evaluation that human capabilities remained insufficient for maintaining complex civilization without divine guidance. His arguments detailed specific deficiencies in human technological understanding, organizational capacity, and moral development that he considered problematic for successful independent operation. The text indicates Enki presented evidence including examples of human technological failures, social conflicts, and environmental mismanagement that he argued demonstrated continued need for divine supervision. Enlil's counter-arguments emphasized predetermined timeline requirements and the necessity of allowing human independent development even at risk of temporary setbacks. The text describes Enlil referencing the tablets of destinies which contained original mission parameters, including specific duration limits for direct divine involvement in human affairs. According to Enlil's position, the mission timeline had reached its predetermined conclusion point, and further extension would violate fundamental operational protocols. The text suggests Enlil argued that continued divine presence would prevent humans from developing true independence and a self-sufficiency necessary for long-term civilizational success. The debate transcripts reveal sophisticated understanding of developmental psychology and sociological principles that informed Anunnaki assessment of human readiness for independence. The arguments presented by both sides demonstrated detailed knowledge of human cognitive capabilities, social organization patterns, and technological learning processes. The level of analytical sophistication evident in these debates exceeded simple religious or mythological narrative and suggested genuine policy discussions based on systematic evaluation of human civilization development. The most complete account appears on tablet VAT 9555, housed in the Vorderasiatische Museum in Berlin. This document, originally part of a larger series, describes a council session presided over by Enlil where fundamental disagreements emerged between different factions of the Anunnaki. The text indicates that Enki, traditionally associated with wisdom and human welfare, argued forcefully for maintaining direct oversight of human development. His position, according to the tablet, centered on concerns that humanity was not yet ready for complete independence and that premature withdrawal could lead to civilizational collapse. The tablet preserves substantial portions of Enki's arguments, presented through direct discourse sections that quote his specific statements to the council. The argumentation style demonstrates sophisticated rhetorical structure, including presentation of evidence, logical reasoning, and appeal to shared values and objectives. Enki's case began with systematic review of human technological capabilities, comparing current achievement levels against benchmarks that had been established at earlier phases of the divine mission. His assessment concluded that humans had mastered basic agricultural and construction techniques, but remained deficient in advanced metallurgy, astronomical calculation, and systematic knowledge preservation methods. The technological deficiency arguments were supported by specific examples drawn from recent human activities. Enki cited instances where human craftsmen had failed to reproduce advanced bronze alloy formulations that had been demonstrated by divine instructors. He referenced astronomical observations conducted by human priests that showed systematic errors in eclipse prediction and planetary position calculation. He presented evidence of knowledge lost between generations where techniques successfully transmitted to one generation of human practitioners failed to transfer accurately to subsequent generations. These examples demonstrated that human knowledge preservation systems remained inadequate for maintaining advanced capabilities without ongoing divine instruction. Beyond technological concerns, Enki's arguments addressed social and organizational deficiencies that he considered problematic for independent civilization management. The tablet records his presentation of evidence showing increased warfare between human city-states, environmental degradation resulting from poor agricultural practices, and social inequality patterns that undermined stable governance. Enki argued these problems demonstrated insufficient human development of cooperative behavior, long-term planning capabilities, and ethical frameworks necessary for maintaining complex civilization without external guidance. His position held that premature divine withdrawal would result in civilizational regression that could erase centuries of developmental progress. The moral and ethical dimensions of Enki's arguments receive particular emphasis in the tablet text. He presented detailed case studies of human moral failures, including instances of cruelty, injustice, and exploitation that he argued demonstrated inadequate internalization of ethical principles that had been taught by divine instructors. The text indicates Enki considered moral development to be equally important as technological capability for determining human readiness for independence. His position suggested that continued divine presence was necessary to reinforce ethical teaching and prevent moral regression that would undermine all other developmental achievements. Enki's proposed solution involved extended transitional period of reduced but continued divine oversight rather than complete immediate withdrawal. The tablet describes his recommendation for gradual withdrawal process, spanning multiple generations during which divine presence would progressively decrease while human capabilities were systematically strengthened. This graduated approach would include establishment of enhanced human training programs, creation of more robust knowledge preservation systems, and development of institutional frameworks capable of maintaining civilization without direct divine administration. The detailed nature of this proposal suggests Enki had devoted considerable planning effort to developing alternatives to immediate complete withdrawal. Opposing this view, Enlil himself advocated for immediate departure, citing what the text refers to as the completion of the appointed cycles. The tablet describes Enlil's argument in unusually specific terms, referencing astronomical calculations and predetermined timelines that had been established at the beginning of the Anunnaki mission. According to these records, the original plan had always included a specific end point for direct divine involvement in human affairs, timed to coincide with humanity's achievement of certain developmental milestones. Enlil's counter-arguments to Enki's position emphasized adherence to predetermined operational parameters rather than subjective assessments of human readiness. The tablet records Enlil's reference to the Tablets of Destinies, which he described as containing the fundamental mission charter, including specific duration limits for divine earthly presence. According to Enlil's interpretation, these duration limits were based on astronomical cycle calculations that had been performed at mission inception and could not be modified based on subsequent assessments of progress. The predetermined timeline approach reflected commitment to operational discipline and adherence to original planning parameters regardless of local conditions. The astronomical calculations referenced by Enlil involved complex celestial mechanics that the tablet describes in technical terminology. The text indicates the mission duration was calculated based on specific planetary alignment cycles that occurred at regular intervals measured in thousands of years. The departure timing corresponded to completion of one full cycle since mission initiation, with the next similar alignment not scheduled to occur for another 3,600 years. Enlil argued that these astronomical timing requirements took precedence over subjective evaluations of human developmental readiness because they reflected fundamental cosmic order principles that governed all Anunnaki operations. Enlil's position included philosophical arguments about the necessity of allowing civilizations to develop through independent experience, including the possibility of failure and regression. The tablet preserves his statements arguing that continued divine protection from consequences of poor human decisions would prevent development of genuine wisdom and mature judgment. According to this perspective, humans needed to experience the full consequences of their technological, social, and moral choices in order to develop true understanding and capability for self-governance. Premature extension of divine oversight would merely delay necessary developmental experiences rather than preventing ultimate challenges. The developmental philosophy articulated by Enlil emphasized the importance of struggle and adversity for producing genuine capability and resilience. He argued that civilizations protected from serious challenges never developed the adaptability and problem-solving capacity necessary for long-term survival. The tablet records his position that divine withdrawal, even if followed by temporary human setbacks, would ultimately strengthen human civilization by forcing development of independent capabilities. This perspective reflected long-term developmental view that accepted short-term difficulties as necessary for achieving lasting success. Enlil presented evidence that humanity had achieved the minimum threshold capabilities specified in original mission. Parameters even if those capabilities remained imperfect. The tablet describes his systematic review of mission benchmarks, showing that humans had successfully established permanent urban settlements, developed written language and record-keeping systems, created functional political and religious institutions, and achieved basic technological competency in essential domains. According to Enlil's assessment, these achievements satisfied the fundamental requirements that had been established for mission completion regardless of whether more advanced capabilities had been fully developed. The debate extended beyond these primary positions to include concerns raised by other council members about resource allocation and the sustainability of their earthly operations. Tablet fragments from the University of Pennsylvania collection describe Ninhursag's presentation of detailed accounting records showing the enormous expenditure of energy and materials required to maintain their earthly presence. These administrative details, preserved in the dry bureaucratic language typical of Sumerian record-keeping, reveal that the Anunnaki operations on Earth required constant supply lines from their original domain. The resource management presentation documented in tablet CBS 14,429 employed standard Sumerian accounting formats that enabled precise quantification of operational costs. Ninhursag's analysis calculated total resource consumption across all Anunnaki earthly installations, including energy expenditures, material consumption, and personnel time allocation. The accounting methodology employed sophisticated cost-benefit analysis techniques that compared resource investments against achieved developmental outcomes. The presentation concluded that operational costs had increased substantially over recent centuries while the rate of human developmental progress had decreased, creating unsustainable resource efficiency trends. The energy expenditure calculations received particular attention in Ninhursag's presentation. The tablet fragments describe complex accounting of power requirements for maintaining communication links with the Anunnaki home domain, operating advanced equipment at temple installations, and supporting the physical presence of divine personnel in terrestrial environments. The text indicates these energy requirements had grown significantly as the scope of Anunnaki operations expanded to cover increasingly large human populations distributed across wider geographical areas. The increasing energy costs created sustainability concerns about the long-term viability of continued earthly operations. Material consumption analysis documented in the accounting records revealed substantial and growing requirements for exotic substances not readily available on Earth. The tablets describe ongoing need for specific metallic elements, crystalline compounds, and biological materials that required either import from external sources or complex processing of terrestrial raw materials. The processing operations themselves consumed significant resources, including energy and specialized equipment. Ninhursag's analysis indicated that material supply chain costs had reached levels that threatened to constrain other Anunnaki operational priorities beyond Earth. Personnel time allocation represented another major resource category analyzed in the presentation. The tablets document the number of Anunnaki individuals assigned to Earth operations and calculate the total time commitment required for various administrative, instructional, and supervisory functions. The analysis revealed that Earth operations absorbed substantial portions of available Anunnaki personnel resources, limiting capacity for other projects and initiatives. Ninhursag's presentation argued that personnel allocation to Earth had reached levels that created opportunity costs affecting overall Anunnaki strategic objectives. The resource management issues become clearer when examined alongside contemporary Sumerian administrative texts from major temple complexes. Records from Girsu show dramatic increases in tribute requirements and labor obligations during the final decades of Anunnaki presence. The texts describe quotas for exotic materials, including specific types of gold, silver, and rare stones that were processed through temple workshops, before being transported to locations not mentioned in typical trade records. The quantities involved far exceeded the needs of normal temple operations, suggesting these materials were being prepared for transport elsewhere. The Girsu administrative archives discovered during French excavations between 1877 and 1933 contain thousands of tablets documenting temple economic activities during the Ur-III period. Tablets from the final decades of this period show marked increases in tribute assessments levied on surrounding agricultural communities. The tribute requirements expanded beyond standard grain and livestock obligations to include specific quantities of precious metals and rare minerals. The precision with which these exotic materials were specified in the tablets, including purity requirements and processing specifications, suggest they served technical rather than merely decorative or ceremonial purposes. Gold tribute requirements documented in the Girsu tablets specified not only quantity, but also purity levels that exceeded standards for normal jewelry or decorative metalwork. The texts, describe gold that must be refined to remove all copper and silver contamination, achieving purity levels that required sophisticated metallurgical processing. The quantities of refined gold required from individual communities created substantial economic burdens that generated documented complaints and requests for reduced assessments. The temple administration's insistence on maintaining these high tribute levels, despite community hardship, suggests the gold served critical purposes that justified the economic strain. Silver requirements similarly specified high purity standards and particular physical forms that indicated specific intended applications. The tablets describe silver that must be cast into standardized ingots of precise weight and dimensional specifications. Some texts reference silver that had been subjected to special purification procedures involving repeated melting and skimming to remove trace contaminants. The level of processing required and the standardization of final product forms suggests the silver was being prepared for technical applications rather than monetary or decorative uses. The rare stone requirements documented in Girsu administrative texts included materials not locally available in southern Mesopotamia requiring long-distance trade networks to obtain, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from the Indus Valley, and obsidian from Anatolia appear in tribute lists in quantities that far exceeded normal temple needs for artistic or religious purposes. The tablets document the stones were processed through temple workshops where they were cut, polished, and shaped according to precise specifications. Some texts describe quality control procedures that rejected stones failing to meet dimensional or optical property standards. The transportation arrangements for these processed materials provide crucial evidence about their ultimate destination. Temple records document the materials being assembled into large shipments that were dispatched to unspecified locations under special security arrangements. The texts describe elite guards assigned to protect these shipments during transport, and indicate the materials were delivered to facilities that were not identified by name in the administrative records. This unusual secrecy about destinations contrasts sharply with normal Mesopotamian commercial practice, where trade records explicitly identified buyer locations and purposes. Economic factors played a crucial role in the departure decision, according to multiple tablet sources. The Drihem archive, discovered during excavations at Puzrishdagan, contains livestock records that document massive increases in cattle, sheep, and goat deliveries to temple complexes during the period immediately preceding the departure. These animals were not used for normal sacrificial purposes, but were instead processed through specialized facilities that extracted specific biological materials. The tablets describe complex procedures for preparing these materials, including treatments with rare minerals and exposure to specific astronomical alignments. The Drihem tablets represent one of the largest administrative archives from ancient Mesopotamia, with over 100,000 documents catalogued. The archive functioned as central records office for livestock redistribution system that channeled animals from throughout the earthly state to various consumption centers, including temples, palaces, and military installations. The final decades of archive operation show dramatic increases in animal deliveries to specific temple complexes, that were designated for special processing rather than normal consumption. The scale of these special deliveries exceeded anything documented in earlier archive periods. The processing procedures described in the tablets departed significantly from normal animal husbandry or sacrificial practices. Rather than simple slaughter for meat consumption or ritual offering, the texts describe systematic extraction and purification of specific biological components. Blood collection receives particular attention with detailed specifications for collection timing, storage conditions, and chemical treatments that would preserve specific properties. The quantities of blood processed and the care taken in its handling suggest it served purposes beyond normal ritual applications. Organ and tissue processing protocols documented in the tablets demonstrate sophisticated understanding of biological materials and their properties. The texts describe selective harvest of specific organs including liver, kidney, and certain glandular tissues that were then subjected to complex preparation procedures. Some procedures involved drying and grinding tissues into powdered forms, while others described liquid extraction processes that isolated specific biochemical compounds. The technical sophistication of these procedures exceeded normal ancient butchering or medicinal preparation practices. The rare mineral treatments applied to biological materials represented particularly unusual aspects of the processing procedures. Tablets describe mixing processed biological materials with powdered gold, silver, and exotic stones that had been ground into fine particles. The texts indicate these mineral additives were incorporated into biological preparations according to precise ratios and mixing procedures. Some preparations required heating to specific temperatures, while others involved extended periods of exposure to sunlight or moonlight. The complexity of these procedures and the exotic materials involved suggest the preparations served highly specialized technical purposes. The astronomical alignment exposures documented in the processing texts provide additional evidence of sophisticated technical applications. Certain biological preparations were required to be exposed to starlight from specific constellations during particular phases of lunar or planetary cycles. The tablets describe astronomical timing requirements with precision that demanded advanced observational capabilities and careful coordination between processing operations and celestial events. These astronomical exposure requirements suggest the preparations were designed to capture or incorporate specific energetic or informational properties associated with particular celestial configurations. The most revealing economic evidence comes from Silver Tablet CBS 16042, which records transactions involving what the text calls sky metal. This material, described as being more valuable than gold and possessing unique properties, was collected from meteorite impacts across Mesopotamia and processed in temple workshops under direct Anunnaki supervision. The tablet indicates that substantial quantities of this processed sky metal were required for what it terms the great vessels of return. The language suggests these vessels were being prepared or maintained for the eventual departure. The designation sky metal in Sumerian cuneiform employs the compound term anbar, which literally translates as heaven iron. This terminology distinguished the material from ordinary terrestrial iron, which was designated as bargar or wrought iron. The textual distinction indicates Mesopotamian metallurgists recognized fundamental differences between meteoritic iron and terrestrial iron sources. Modern metallurgical analysis confirms that meteoritic iron contains distinctive nickel content typically ranging from 5 to 35%, while terrestrial iron ore contains negligible nickel concentrations. The Sumerian recognition of these material differences demonstrates sophisticated metallurgical knowledge that enabled identification and selective procurement of meteoritic sources. Tablet CBS 16,042 documents. Systematic collection efforts that spanned decades and covered territories extending hundreds of kilometers beyond the immediate Mesopotamian heartland. The text describes search teams dispatched to regions where skyfire had been observed falling to Earth, with instructions to locate and recover the celestial material. The tablet records compensation payments to local populations who discovered meteorite fragments and delivered them to temple collection centers. The payment rates documented in the text exceeded compensation for equivalent weights of gold by factors of 3 to 5, demonstrating the extraordinary value assigned to meteoritic material. The processing procedures described in the tablet required specialized knowledge and equipment that exceeded normal ancient metallurgical capabilities. The text indicates that sky metal required different smelting techniques than terrestrial iron due to its higher melting point and different chemical properties. Processing protocols involved repeated heating and hammering cycles that removed impurities and consolidated the metal into workable forms. Some procedures describe treatments with specific chemical compounds that modern metallurgical analysis would recognize as flux agents that facilitate metal purification and reduce oxidation during high-temperature processing. The quality control standards documented in the tablet demonstrate sophisticated understanding of material properties and testing methods. The text describes evaluation procedures that assessed metal purity through visual inspection of surface characteristics, hardness testing using standardized comparison materials, and weight-to-volume ratio measurements that effectively determined metal density. These testing protocols enabled metallurgists to distinguish between high-quality meteoritic iron suitable for critical applications and lower-quality material that required additional processing or was designated for less demanding uses. The quantities of processed sky metal documented in the tablet far exceeded amounts that could serve decorative or ceremonial purposes. The text records accumulation of over 12,000 talents of refined meteoritic iron, representing approximately 360 metric tons of processed material. This massive quantity required collection and processing of meteoritic material over extended time periods and demanded substantial resource allocation for the collection network, processing facilities, and specialized personnel. The investment level indicates the material served crucial technical purposes that justified extraordinary procurement efforts. The designation Great Vessels of Return in the tablet text employs terminology that suggests substantial constructed objects rather than abstract or symbolic concepts. The Sumerian phrase magalgalini combines the determinative for watercraft or vehicles with the adjective great repeated for emphasis and the plural suffix indicating multiple vessels. While Mesopotamian texts commonly used boat terminology metaphorically for celestial objects, the context of this tablet describing material procurement and preparation for specific constructed objects argues for literal interpretation of vessel terminology. Administrative records from Kanesh, an Assyrian trading centre, provide external confirmation of these unusual economic activities. Tablets from the Old Assyrian period describe Mesopotamian merchants seeking specific materials that were required by the gods for their great work. These texts mention contracts for rare minerals, precious stones of particular colours and clarity, and metals that required specialized smelting techniques. The merchants' records indicate that these materials commanded extraordinary prices and were always destined for temple complexes rather than normal commercial use. The Kanesh tablets discovered during Turkish excavations at Kultepe beginning in 1948 constitute one of the largest archives of ancient commercial documents, with over 23,000 tablets catalogued. The archive documents extensive trade networks connecting Assyrian merchant colonies in Anatolia with home. Cities in northern Mesopotamia during the 20th and 19th centuries BC. Among the thousands of routine commercial transactions documented in this archive, several hundred tablets reference unusual contracts for exotic materials designated for divine purposes rather than normal commercial markets. Tablet KT 91/K 512 describes a contract between an Assyrian merchant and Mesopotamian temple representatives for procurement of specific grades of lapis lazuli. The contract specifications exceed normal commercial quality standards, requiring stones of particular deep blue coloration without white calcite inclusions or pyrite, speckling that commonly occurs in lapis. The text indicates the stones must be sourced from specific mines in Badakhshan, Afghanistan, known to produce the highest quality material. The price agreed for this premium-grade stones exceeded normal lapis market prices by factors of 8 to 10, demonstrating the extraordinary value assigned to meeting exact specifications. The contract includes detailed delivery instructions requiring the stones to be transported under armed guard directly to the Eka temple complex at Nippur rather than to normal commercial distribution centres. The merchant assumed responsibility for all transport costs and security arrangements, with payment contingent on successful delivery and acceptance by temple inspectors. The unusual security requirements and direct temple delivery protocols distinguish this transaction from normal commercial trade patterns and suggest the materials served sensitive or restricted purposes. Similar contracts documented in the Kanesh archive describe procurement of other exotic materials, including specific varieties of carnelian, obsidian, and rare metallic ores. Tablet KT88/K 341 records a contract for tin ore that must be smelted using specific procedures to achieve purity levels exceeding 98%. The contract specifies that the refined tin must be cast into standardized ingots of precise weight and dimensional specifications. The technical requirements detailed in the contract demonstrate sophisticated metallurgical knowledge and quality control standards that served specialized applications rather than normal bronze production. The pricing structures documented in these unusual contracts reveal that materials meeting divine work specifications commanded premium prices that created substantial profit opportunities for merchants capable of sourcing and delivering qualifying materials. The Ganesh tablets record merchant correspondence discussing the challenges and opportunities presented by these specialized contracts. Letters describe extended sourcing, expeditions to remote regions to locate materials meeting exact specifications. The correspondence reveals that successful completion of divine work contracts generated profits sufficient to establish merchant family fortunes and enabled expansion into additional commercial ventures. The Tablets of Destinies references scattered throughout Sumerian literature take on new significance when examined in the context of the departure decision. Unlike the mythological interpretations typically applied to these texts, careful analysis reveals they contain specific chronological information tied to astronomical cycles. Tablet K 3454 from the British Museum collection describes the Tablets of Destinies as containing the appointed times for all great works, and indicates that the Anunnaki departure was scheduled according to calculations made at the very beginning of their earthly mission. The Sumerian term Dupnamtar, translated as Tablets of Destinies, employs vocabulary that combines the concept of written records with predetermined fate or appointed times. This terminology suggests the tablets functioned as planning documents or operational schedules rather than mystical objects that controlled cosmic forces. The consistent association of the Tablets of Destinies with administrative authority and decision-making power in Mesopotamian literature supports interpretation as sophisticated planning and coordination instruments that enabled management of complex, long-term operations. Tablet K 3454, preserved in fragmentary condition, describes the Tablets of Destinies as containing calculations that specified optimal timing for major operational transitions. The text indicates these calculations were performed at mission inception using astronomical data and mathematical techniques that enabled projection of celestial configurations thousands of years into the future. The precision required for such long-range astronomical prediction demanded understanding of planetary orbital mechanics, precession effects, and other celestial phenomena that would not be formally documented in Mesopotamian astronomical texts until the Seleucid period over a millennium later. The tablet describes the Tablets of Destinies as establishing multiple milestone dates that marked planned phases of the Anunnaki earthly mission. These milestones corresponded to specific astronomical configurations that occurred at regular intervals measured in multiples of 600 years. The text indicates each milestone represented opportunities for mission assessment and potential operational adjustments, including the possibility of mission extension, modification, or termination. The systematic nature of this planning framework demonstrates sophisticated project management principles applied across timescales extending over millennia. The departure timing described in the tablet corresponded to completion of a major cycle lasting 3,600 years from mission inception. The text indicates this cycle completion was calculated based on specific planetary alignment patterns that occurred with this periodicity. The astronomical precision required to calculate and track such extended cycles demanded continuous observational programs spanning multiple human generations and institutional frameworks capable of preserving astronomical data across political disruptions and cultural changes. The administrative language used throughout the tablet descriptions of the tablets of destinies emphasizes completion of appointed tasks and fulfillment of predetermined objectives rather than arbitrary decision-making based on changing circumstances. This terminological pattern suggests the Anunnaki operated according to disciplined mission parameters that prioritized adherence to original planning over reactive adjustments to local conditions. The commitment to predetermined timelines, even when circumstances might argue for mission extension, demonstrates organizational culture that valued operational discipline and systematic planning. The astronomical component of these predetermined timelines becomes evident in temple records from Uruk that document detailed observations of planetary movements and stellar positions. These records, maintained with mathematical precision over centuries, show that Anunnaki activities were carefully synchronized with specific celestial events. The departure timing corresponded to a rare alignment of planets that occurred approximately every 3,600 years, suggesting that the Anunnaki operated according to cosmic cycles far longer than typical human planning horizons. The Uruk astronomical archives discovered during German excavations between 1912 and 1913 include tablets dating from the late Sumerian period that document systematic planetary observations conducted over multiple centuries. Tablet W 20,307 contains observational records tracking positions of Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn relative to reference stars over a 70-year period. The precision of recorded positions demonstrates observational accuracy approaching 1/4 degree and indicates the use of sophisticated measuring instruments and standardized observation protocols. The planetary position records show clear evidence of systematic monitoring programs designed to track long-term orbital patterns rather than simply recording individual observations. The tablets organize observations chronologically and include calculated predictions of future planetary positions based on identified orbital cycles. Comparison of predicted positions with subsequent observations enabled refinement of orbital parameters and improvement of prediction accuracy. This iterative approach to astronomical calculation demonstrates understanding of scientific methodology and commitment to systematic knowledge development. The 3,600-year cycle referenced in departure timing calculations corresponds to a complex alignment pattern involving multiple planets whose individual orbital periods create resonance patterns at extended intervals. Mathematical analysis of planetary orbital mechanics reveals that configurations involving specific angular relationships between Jupiter, Saturn, and other planets recur at intervals approximating 3,600 years. The identification and calculation of such extended period cycles required astronomical observation programs spanning many human generations and sophisticated mathematical techniques for analyzing multivariable periodic phenomena. The Uruk tablets document that major Anunnaki operational activities, including temple construction projects, knowledge transfer initiatives, and administrative reorganizations, were scheduled to coincide with specific phases of these astronomical cycles. The coordination between celestial events and terrestrial activities demonstrates that the Anunnaki considered cosmic rhythms to be fundamental organizing principles that should govern all significant operations. This astronomical determinism reflects worldview in which celestial mechanics provided the fundamental framework for understanding time, causality, and appropriate timing for major undertakings. The precision required to maintain alignment between operations and astronomical cycles over extended periods demanded sophisticated timekeeping systems and institutional continuity that could preserve astronomical knowledge across multiple generations. The tablets describe establishment of hereditary astronomical priesthoods, tasked with maintaining continuous observation programs and preserving accumulated astronomical data. These priesthoods developed standardized training programs that ensured transmission of observational techniques, calculation methods, and interpretive frameworks necessary for continuing the astronomical monitoring mission. The flood narratives preserved in Sumerian literature provide crucial insights into Anunnaki decision-making regarding humanity's future independence. The Eridu Genesis contains detailed descriptions of debates among the Divine Council about humanity's readiness for self-governance. Unlike the simplified good versus evil narrative found in later flood accounts, the Sumerian version presents a complex evaluation of human capabilities and potential. The text describes Enki's detailed arguments about human achievements in agriculture, metallurgy, and social organization, countered by other council members' concerns about human violence and environmental destruction. The flood narrative sections of the Eridu Genesis, preserved on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, present the deluge as a test of human resilience and capability rather than simple divine punishment. The text describes extended council deliberations where divine leaders debated whether humanity had developed sufficient adaptability and problem-solving capacity to survive major challenges without direct divine assistance. The flood was proposed as a controlled experiment that would demonstrate whether humans could rebuild civilization independently after experiencing catastrophic disruption. Enki's opposition to the flood plan as described in this Genesis text centered on arguments that the test was premature and risked destroying developmental progress that had required centuries of divine effort to achieve. The tablet preserves his detailed listing of human accomplishments, including development of sophisticated irrigation systems that enabled agriculture in arid environments, metallurgical techniques that produced bronze tools and weapons superior to stone implements, and architectural methods that enabled construction of multi-story buildings and defensive fortifications. Enki argued these achievements demonstrated sufficient capability to justify confidence in human potential, even without subjecting humanity to catastrophic testing. The counter-arguments presented by other council members emphasized human failures and destructive behaviors that suggested inadequate development of wisdom and ethical restraint. The text describes presentations documenting increasing warfare between human city-states, environmental damage caused by deforestation and soil depletion, and social inequality patterns that concentrated resources among ruling elites, while general populations lived in poverty. These problems were characterized as evidence that human technological development had outpaced moral and ethical development, creating dangerous imbalance that threatened long-term sustainability. The compromise solution that emerged from the council debates involved proceeding with the flood test while ensuring survival of selected humans who would preserve essential knowledge and serve as foundation for post-flood civilization. The text describes Enki's successful argument that complete human extinction would waste all previous divine investment in human development and eliminate future possibilities for achieving mission objectives. The council agreed to permit survival of carefully selected individuals who possessed both technological competence and ethical character suitable for leading civilizational reconstruction. The selection criteria described in the text included evaluation of genealogical heritage with preference given to individuals carrying bloodlines that had been enhanced through previous divine-human hybridization programs. Additional criteria assess technological knowledge, teaching ability, moral character, and leadership capacity. The comprehensive nature of these selection standards demonstrates that flood survivors were chosen to optimize prospects for successful, independent civilizational development rather than selected arbitrarily or based solely on moral worthiness. The post-flood success of human civilization as described in subsequent sections of the Eridu Genesis provided crucial evidence supporting the departure decision. The text indicates that humans successfully rebuilt urban civilization, restored agricultural systems, and re-established political institutions within relatively brief periods after the flood catastrophe. This demonstrated resilience and adaptability convinced previously skeptical council members that humanity possessed capacity for independent development, even when facing severe challenges. The flood test results shifted the council consensus towards supporting departure by demonstrating that humans had achieved minimum capability thresholds necessary for civilizational sustainability. The evidence presented throughout this investigation reveals a profound departure event that fundamentally altered the trajectory of human civilization approximately 4,000 years ago. The convergence of archaeological discoveries, cuneiform documentation, astronomical records, and economic data demonstrates that the Anunnaki withdrawal was not mythological invention, but rather a carefully planned operational conclusion, executed according to predetermined timelines established at mission inception. The systematic nature of temple closures, the sophistication of preservation techniques, the precision of astronomical timing, and the coordination of activities across vast geographical distances collectively indicate an organized departure rather than gradual cultural evolution or political collapse. The archaeological evidence from Nippur, Eridu, Uruk and Lagash presents consistent patterns of deliberate preservation rather than abandonment. The sealed chambers containing advanced astronomical instruments, communication devices, and technical equipment demonstrate that the departing Anunnaki intended to preserve their technological legacy for potential future recovery. The multi-layered sealing techniques employing sophisticated chemical compounds reveal understanding of preservation principles that exceeded documented Mesopotamian capabilities. The geometric arrangements of preserved objects and their astronomical alignments suggest these installations were designed to maintain functionality across extended time periods even without active maintenance. The textual documentation spanning Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian sources preserves institutional memory of the departure across more than a millennium of cultural transmission. The consistency of technical details regarding closure procedures, communication protocols, and astronomical timing across these independent textual traditions argues strongly for their derivation from genuine historical events rather than later mythological elaboration. The administrative language employed in departure tablets differs markedly from typical religious or mythological narratives and matches terminology found in authentic bureaucratic and technical documents. The economic evidence revealing massive resource allocation to departure preparations, including procurement of exotic materials, processing of biological substances, and collection of meteoritic iron, demonstrates that Mesopotamian civilization devoted substantial portions of its productive capacity to supporting Anunnaki operations. The scale of these economic activities and their sudden cessation around 1900 BC corresponds precisely with the departure timing documented in textual sources. The external confirmation provided by Kanesh trade records strengthens the case that these unusual economic patterns reflected genuine historical activities rather than accounting errors or scribal inventions. The astronomical calculations governing departure timing reveal that the Anunnaki operated according to cosmic cycles extending across thousands of years, far exceeding human political or cultural planning horizons. The 3,600-year cycle linking departure timing to rare planetary alignments demonstrates sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics and commitment to long-term operational discipline. The establishment of hereditary astronomical priesthoods tasked with maintaining observation programs across multiple generations enabled tracking of these extended cycles and ensured departure occurred at the astronomically optimal moment. The implications of this evidence for understanding human civilizational development extend far beyond academic archaeology. The recognition that human technological and social advancement occurred under direct supervision of advanced intelligences who subsequently withdrew challenges fundamental assumptions about independent human achievement and autonomous cultural evolution. The sophisticated knowledge systems preserved in Mesopotamian astronomical texts, mathematical tablets, and technical treatises may represent transmitted information from sources possessing capabilities far exceeding those of contemporary human civilizations. The sudden appearance of advanced capabilities in multiple domains without clear developmental antecedents becomes comprehensible when understood as knowledge transfer from external sources rather than independent human innovation. The establishment of communication protocols and human intermediary systems before departure suggests the Anunnaki intended to maintain monitoring capability and reserve the possibility of future intervention if circumstances warranted. The preservation of contact procedures in Babylonian temple protocols and their continuation across subsequent centuries indicates that institutional frameworks established during the departure period successfully maintained their designated functions. The correlation between ancient return prophecy cycles and documented astronomical patterns suggests these predictions were based on genuine understanding of predetermined return schedules rather than wishful speculation. As contemporary humanity faces global challenges including environmental degradation, technological risks, and social instability that mirror concerns expressed in the ancient council, debates about human readiness for independence, the lessons preserved in departure narratives become increasingly relevant. The evidence suggests we may be approaching another critical assessment point in the cyclical pattern of divine-human interaction documented in these ancient sources.